Hi, it's Katrina. There are some crazy ancient monuments that are not what they might seem. From sphinxes in China to pyramids in Europe, I want to ask you, are they ancient marvels or modern hoaxes? Maybe a mix of both?
The Bosnian Pyramids.
The Bosnian pyramids might be nothing but a couple of large hills. But then again, if amateur archaeologist Sam Osmanagic is correct, they might belong to the largest pyramid complex on Earth. Sam is an interesting character. The middle-aged Bosnian spent almost 2 decades living in Houston, Texas. His eccentric life has taken him to a farmer's backyard on the edge of Visoko, located in Bosnia and Herzegovina, about 15 miles from the capital. Sam believes that just beyond the farmer's backyard is a pyramid built 12,000 years ago.
To locals, it's known simply as Plesavica Hill. It's covered in trees and shrubs, rising about 300 feet above the ground. Locals think it's a natural lump, but Sam thinks it's a pyramid. Not just any old pyramid either. He calls it the Pyramid of the Moon. On the opposite side of town is another mystery, Visosica Hill. This also looks like a natural hill with some trees on it, though a bit bigger than Plesavica Hill. It stands 720 feet tall, making it significantly larger than any pyramid in Egypt. Sam calls it the Pyramid of the Sun. There is a third pyramid nearby in the hills, but it's less exciting. Sam thinks the whole area was once a pyramid complex, sort of like Teotihuacan in Mexico. Thousands of people from across Europe would have gathered in the complex to celebrate their gods and hold rituals. But what about scientific evidence? Unfortunately, there is absolutely zilch. Sam has appeared on TV programs and documentaries. He's a national celebrity. He's also made a decent amount of money by selling books promoting his idea of the Bosnian pyramids. But he has no proof. In fact, Sam has the opposite of proof. He's only found evidence opposing his beliefs. In 2006, Sam reached out to a team of scientists at the University of Tuzla. He wanted to analyze core samples of Visosica Hill. The core samples showed nothing unusual. The alleged pyramid was composed of the exact same matter as other mountains in the area. These mountains were all formed 10 million years ago by natural processes.
Geologist Robert Schoch at Boston University spent 10 days at the site in 2006. After carefully analyzing the hills/pyramids, he said, and I quote, "It's completely straightforward and mundane." After scores of workers dug through the hills in search of any trace of human activity, they found nothing. Just silt and clay, cracked sandstone, you get it.
Paul Heinrich from Louisiana State University said the landform Sam claims is a pyramid is quite common. Almost every scientist who has seen the site thinks it's natural. Most of the outliers have been local Bosnian scientists, like Enver Buza from Sarajevo's Geodetic Institute. Enver claimed the Pyramid of the Sun, aka Visosica Hill, is oriented north with perfect precision.
Still, Sam won't let up. He claimed the natural rocks found inside the hill are from conglomerate blocks made of concrete. What the scientists said were natural, Sam said were paved terraces made of sandstone plates. Outside of Bosnia, few people believe in the reality of Sam's pyramids.
Staging Europe's largest stone circle.
One of the greatest archaeological treasures in Britain is the stone circle at Avebury. The only ancient monument more famous than this one in all of the UK is Stonehenge. But Avebury has turned out to be something unexpected. Some new images have been released showing men in the 1930s building it themselves. What kind of crazy conspiracy has been unleashed? Archive images were published by Historic England that show restoration work taking place in the small Wiltshire village of Avebury.
Take a look for yourself. Here are a couple pictures from the Historic England archive showing men building the stone circle.
It really makes you wonder what else we've been lied to about. Foamhenge is supposed to be one of the greatest marvels of prehistoric Britain.
Archaeologists, and I mean all mainstream archaeologists, say Avebury was built around 2850 BC. Inside the borders of the henge is the biggest stone circle in Britain, made of roughly 100 stones. These newly released photographs are a little unsettling. Historic England released 550 digitized photo slides for the very first time. They are all freely available to the public, so check them out for yourself if you want to browse the catalog. The pictures come with a story, one you might not like. There was a man named Alexander Keeler who made a fortune from marmalade. This guy was a marmalade tycoon. Two words you never thought you'd hear side by side. Alexander purchased a large plot of land at Avebury. He also happened to be an amateur archaeologist who dabbled in the occult and may have worshipped the sun. Alexander took it upon himself to finance the restoration of what he believed to be an ancient monument in Avebury. From 1937 to 38, Alexander led major restorative work at the site. The workers used heavy machinery, gunpowder, trucks, and lots of modern equipment during their work. Many of the ancient stones were set in concrete so that they would stay in their proper position. The Avebury stone circle isn't entirely fake, it's just that the rocks aren't all where they are supposed to be. In the early part of the 20th century, the monument was shattered. It had been almost 100% destroyed. Its massive stones were broken, scattered, and toppled over. Many of the standing stones had been purposely demolished during the medieval period by fanatic Christians. The largest of the sarsen stones were heated using bonfires and then smashed into pieces. This was a common occurrence across much of Europe as Christians tried to remove all traces of pagan civilizations. This is a little tidbit of history you don't hear much about. Christians tried their hardest to destroy all the ancient sites they knew about. Historians have no accurate estimate of how many magical places may have been lost this way. If Alexander hadn't come along to save it, the Avebury stone circle almost certainly would have been lost. But one question remains. How accurate is this site today? Restoring one of the largest stone circles on the planet isn't an easy task, yet experts think he did a fairly good job. Nobody will ever know what the stone circle originally looked like, but this is a good representation.
If you ever find yourself at Stonehenge, stop by Avebury. It's only 17 miles away and is significantly larger. And if you do go, be sure to hold your ear against one of the stones and listen closely. Avebury, unlike Stonehenge, lets you touch the sacred stones. Visitors often listen for the ancient voices embedded in the stone, or to hug them to feel the energy within. It's shout-out time! I want to give a huge thank you to Sean O'Shields for the generous super thanks. It really helps a lot. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe to join the Origins Explained family.
Menasdra Temple Mysteries.
Menasdra is a Stone Age enigma. It's a mysterious solar temple complex that aligns perfectly with the sun on each equinox and each solstice. What magic was used in building this impressive monument 5,600 years ago?
Menasdra stands on the island of Malta in the Mediterranean Sea. The island has been home to human civilization since roughly 5900 BC. It's unclear what happened on the island, only that people built strange stone monuments and worshipped nameless gods. Around 3850 BC, a new wave of people arrived on the island from the coast of Sicily. They were the ones who started building Menasdra. This is one of my favorite Mediterranean mysteries. Menasdra and other megalithic temples on Malta were built all the way until roughly 2500 BC. And then something happened. The building stopped, and so did human activity. There is no evidence anyone even lived on the island until much later in the Bronze Age. People just sort of stopped existing for almost 1,000 years. Then they showed back up like nothing happened. In 1840, when Malta belonged to the British Empire, Menasdra was excavated by J.G. Vance. Excavations have been ongoing ever since. Yet despite almost 2 centuries of investigation, archaeologists are still in the dark. They can't figure out what the temple complex was used for. One of the most popular theories is that Menasdra was a temple complex used for ceremonial sacrifices. This train of thought comes from the fact that scientists have found so many bones in the ruins, mostly animal bones. There likely wasn't any human sacrifice, but who knows?
The sacrifice angle still doesn't explain the incredible sunrise each time there's an equinox. When the Earth tilts towards the sun on the equinox, piercing rays of sunlight burst through the door of the lower temple. Light blossoms inside the axis of the building as if a divine god was beamed down from heaven.
Evidence of an antediluvian civilization.
In the African nation of Zambia, along the bank of the ancient Kalambo River, archaeologists are changing history. An excavation team uncovered a monument that dates back 500,000 years. It might just be the oldest known structure in the world. This is a huge deal. I mean, really, a major discovery that's been discussed by just about every mainstream news outlet you can think of. It isn't a conspiracy, it's a real discovery.
The structure consists of two interlocking logs. The logs are connected by a notch that was cut so that the two pieces fit together perfectly at right angles. The discovery was made in 2019 by Jeff Duller, a professor of geography at the University of Aberystwyth. However, it was only last year, in 2023, that the scientists came forward with their findings. According to Jeff, the wooden beams were part of a platform, perhaps a walkway, or the beams may have been part of a foundation for a dwelling. The structure could have even been used as a storage facility for keeping food or firewood. The really shocking part of the wooden beams is how old they are: 500,000 years old, meaning the beams were made about 200,000 years before human beings existed. The discovery of this buried monument in Africa changes everything. Jeff and his team said the wooden structure has no parallel in the archaeological record. That's to say that nothing like it has ever been found. The oldest thing that's kind of similar were some stalactites discovered in a cave that looked to have been stacked up to form walls. It was a sort of cave house, a really rudimentary building completely in the dark. The makeshift structure was found to be 175,000 years old, made by Neanderthals. There are a lot of insinuations and implications that scientists need to take into consideration.
For example, Jeff Duller said the complexity of the old monument suggests that the people who built it were sophisticated cognitively. In other words, they had enough brain power to plot and execute a complicated plan. This likely required language, meaning the non-human builders could speak to one another. Could the structure have been one of many houses in an ancient Neanderthal town? Were there a lot of them and this is the only proof left? I have so many questions.
Lincoln's fake log cabin.
When it comes to things not being quite what they seem, there is no better example than one of America's most beloved monuments. You may have even been there yourself. It's called the Abraham Lincoln Birthplace National Historical Park. The park is said to be the place where Abe Lincoln was born in 1809. The problem is, well, you'll see in a second.
On September 19, 1948, the Washington Post published an article on their front page. The article claimed that Abraham Lincoln's birthplace cabin was a hoax. The cabin they mentioned is the one enshrined in Hodgenville, Kentucky. Up until the time of the article, most people assumed the cabin was real. Everyone thought this was the rundown shanty where the 16th President of the United States of America was born. But it isn't. Let's go back to the beginning of the 19th century. In the late autumn of 1808, Thomas and Nancy Lincoln settled on a little plot of land and built themselves a quaint one-room log cabin. This wasn't a one-bedroom cabin, it was one room, essentially a big box made of logs. In this cabin, Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12, 1809. 100 years later, on the centennial of his birthday, President Theodore Roosevelt laid the cornerstone for the memorial building that would enshrine Lincoln's family cabin. The memorial was finished in 1911. In the 1940s, Lincoln scholar Roy Hayes voiced his opinion that the cabin inside the shrine was not original. Even more bizarre, he claimed the cabin was built out of logs that came from the fake cabin that was supposedly the birthplace of Jefferson Davis. Roy even had proof. He presented a letter written in 1919 by Robert Todd Lincoln, Abraham's son. Robert claimed the cabin everyone was so obsessed about was a fraud and not the family's actual home.
The National Park Service did soon admit that they hadn't been telling the whole truth. They said there was no evidence to support the theory that the cabin witnessed the birth of Abraham Lincoln. Nowadays, it's known that the real cabin was dismantled around 1865 and the logs were used to construct nearby homes. The cabin inside the memorial is only symbolic. Nobody has ever lived in it.
The new discovery from the 1990s? It's hard to imagine it happening in this day and age, but stone circles are still being found. In Scotland last November, an ancient circle of small stone monoliths was uncovered by a farmer. Archaeologists were convinced the stones were erected 4,500 years ago. I'm here to tell you they were dead wrong. It must be embarrassing as an archaeologist to say something is ancient, only to learn it was made in the 1990s. It turned out the stone circle was created by a farmer with an interest in archaeology less than 30 years ago. These monoliths are nothing but rocks. I mean, technically all monoliths are nothing but rocks, but you know what I'm saying. The current owners of the property had no idea that the previous owners had built the stone circle for fun. When the new owners came across it, they called Historic Environment Scotland, thinking they had just stumbled upon a historical treasure. Professional archaeologists were sent to the site where they found the rocks mystifying. They had no reason to believe that they were walking into a hoax. A local woman in her 80s even claimed that she saw the stone circle when she was a young girl in the 1930s. Everything pointed to a legit mystery. So the investigation started. Academic specialists were getting involved. This was a big operation unfolding because the stone circle was truly remarkable. It looked like somewhere a group of druids would gather for strange rituals. There are about 99 recumbent stone circles in Scotland. Each time a big one is found, archaeologists get very excited. Experts have never been able to unravel the real purpose of the monuments. The best guess anyone has is that the stone circles were used as either calendars, as astronomical observatories, or for hosting ceremonial fires. Before things went too far, the former property owner stepped forward and ruined the fun. When he realized what was happening, he confessed that it was he who built the stone circle, and that there was nothing mysterious at all happening. The old farmer had never intended to trick anyone. He had never even told anybody about the monument. It was just a hobby project, one that he never meant to cause such chaos. But now you know, if you really like stone circles, you should just put one in your own backyard. The Chinese Sphinx. If you ever wanted to see the Sphinx but can't stand the heat of the Egyptian desert, you can always travel to China. A humongous replica of the Great Sphinx of Giza was recently built at the Lanzhou Silk Road Cultural Relics Park. It isn't the only world wonder in the park either. It isn't even the only Sphinx in the country. The town of Lanzhou was once a major trading hub on the Silk Road. It was inhabited as early as the 6th century BC. By the 1st century AD, it had become a prosperous trading metropolis at the edge of the Yellow River. Lanzhou was so important for the economy of the Han Dynasty that the Great Wall of China was extended along its borders to protect it. There are still crumbling pieces of the Great Wall outside the modern city, which these days is a center of heavy industry. It's also one of the global leaders in scientific research. In fact, Lanzhou University is considered one of the most prestigious universities on the planet. Getting back to the newly built Sphinx, Lanzhou is hoping to put itself on the tourist map by recreating world wonders. The park also has a replica of the Greek Parthenon in Athens. There aren't many places you can take a picture with the Sphinx and the Parthenon within the same 5 minutes. What's really wild is how often this happens. Check out this Sphinx, the image from Reuters. Its head was removed from its body and dumped on the outskirts of Xizhishuang, where it's become a giant piece of trash. Local authorities were forced to tear it down after Egypt complained. While I'm on the topic of tricky monuments, check these ones out. Here's Stonehenge, only it's not quite right. It was built near a housing development in Hefei, eastern China. And here's a replica of the Eiffel Tower, standing 350 feet in a luxury estate development in Hangzhou. I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that if you want to do a whole world tour of ancient monuments without much legwork, China is the place to do it. Foamhenge. Who needs to visit Stonehenge when you can visit Foamhenge? There is an exact replica of Britain's most famous prehistoric monument in Centreville, Virginia. It's a lot cheaper to visit if you live in North America and don't feel like crossing the Atlantic Ocean. Foamhenge is made of styrofoam, created by fiberglass sculptor Mark Klein in 2004. He once called it his greatest achievement. Mark was inspired when he walked into a business and saw 16-foot tall blocks that kind of looked like megalithic stone blocks. It was an epiphany, a light bulb illuminating over his head in a thought bubble. Mark could make his own version of Stonehenge. First, Foamhenge was built at the Natural Bridge in Virginia. The owner of the land allowed Mark to build it for free with the hope of attracting tourists. Then, in 2017, it was relocated to Centreville, where the imitation monument looks a little more convincing. In photos, you can barely tell the difference. In fact, a lot of people claim Foamhenge is even more photogenic than the real deal. The huge styrofoam blocks look like real stones from a distance, especially with the right angle and lighting. Foamhenge is the same size as the original. It's astronomically accurate, only it's about 20 years old instead of 4,000 years old. It's also on the other side of the planet. Oh yes, and it took 10 days to assemble, unlike Stonehenge that took roughly 1,000 years to build. Whereas the sarsen stones at Stonehenge weigh roughly 25 tons, their American styrofoam counterparts weigh about 100 pounds each. They are a lot easier to move around. Be sure to check out Foamhenge on your next trip through Virginia. It's one of the most popular roadside attractions in the country. Here's a picture of the monument at night, the stars twinkling brightly above the featherweight boulders. Still, you can hardly tell the difference. What do you think? Do you want to go, or have you been there already? Let us know in the comments below. Faking the Etruscans. For 3 decades, a group of forged statues fooled the top experts at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. It was one of the most embarrassing chapters in the museum's history. In 1933, a trio of beautifully sculpted terracotta clay warriors stood proudly in the museum. The warriors were Etruscan, made in the 5th century BC. They were depictions of fierce fighters who battled against the Romans for dominance over Italy. As you might already know, the Etruscans lost and the Romans won. The 3 statues were incredible to behold. 2 of them stood almost 9 feet tall. The third was only a head, albeit a big one. It was 4 feet tall, its huge eyes looking down at the curious audience from underneath its bulky war helmet. These sculptures were acquired by a man named John Marshall, who worked at the museum. He was so astonished by the statues that he once wrote, "I can find nothing approaching it in importance." John said the pieces challenged the very history of ancient Italian art. There was just one issue with John's statements. He was talking about fake monuments. John had acquired the artifacts from a dealer named Pietro Stettiner in the late 1910s. The statues were convincing enough that John barely second-guessed them. His colleagues said they were too good to be true. And they were. Even the museum was uneasy about keeping the huge sculptures on display. But John was convinced they were real. John passed away in 1928. He died never learning how embarrassed the museum would be because of his beloved statues. Pietro Stettiner was linked to a series of forged artifacts in Italy. Critics started coming out against the museum, saying they were obviously displaying forgeries. Experts claimed the statues were the wrong shape, the wrong size, the state of preservation was preposterous, the proportions were wrong. Basically, they were no good. The nail in the coffin, though, didn't come until 1960. It took a ceramic archaeologist named Joseph V. Noble to finally confirm the statues were fake. He did this by replicating the methods used by the Etruscans to make pottery. The chemical makeup made it impossible to deny the truth any longer. Knowing the jig was up, the museum locked the sculptures away in the basement in 1962. Easter Island monuments, bodies, hats, and something new. People used to think the statues of Easter Island were only heads. They were even called the Easter Island heads. Then excavations revealed the bodies. The heads had only been the tip of the iceberg, with the statues' bodies hidden underneath the dirt like carrots. The next big discovery was that the Easter Island statues used to wear hats. Then researchers figured out they were built on platforms. Underneath the bodies, archaeologists uncovered the remnants of monumental platforms. Centuries ago, the Easter Island statues loomed like the golden effigies of emperors in ancient Rome. And now, even more secrets have been unlocked. The statues, known as moai, are like onions. Each time archaeologists peel one layer away, another one is waiting for them. This time, experts wanted to learn why the monuments were placed in specific locations on the island. They used spatial modeling techniques to understand why the islanders placed the statues where they did. The results were shocking. One of the biggest conundrums of Easter Island has always been its availability of fresh water. Easter Island isn't exactly a tropical paradise blessed by ample rain. There is very little in the way of drinkable liquid, either in lakes or underground reservoirs. There's a bit, but not much. The team of scientists from Binghamton University realized the statues seem to be most densely concentrated around water sources. Now, scientists are starting to think the 900 statues that dot the island could have been used to mark where the water was. It's an interesting theory that needs more exploration. No matter how much is learned of the Moai, they continue to elude full understanding. Scientists still need to figure out how the hats were put on their heads and why so many ended up buried to their necks. The Four Corners Monument is wrong. The Four Corners Monument is supposed to mark the exact spot where the states of Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah meet. You can lie down and spread yourself like a starfish over all 4 states, which is pretty cool. It pains me to say it, but I have some bad news for all those who have visited the monument. It turns out the monument is a great big liar. According to the National Geodetic Survey, it was built 1,800 feet east from where it was intended. How could this have happened? Experts say there was a mix-up with the surveying equipment. The exact location decreed by Congress was missed by nearly half a mile. Does this mean that everyone who has ever visited the Four Corners Monument never truly stood in all 4 states? Maybe not. First, let's do a bit of sleuthing. The truth is that this monument is more than just a mark to separate 4 states. It also marks the boundaries between 2 Native American governments, one being the Navajo Nation and the other being the Ute tribe. The entire area known as Four Corners began as Native American land. Then, in the 16th century, the Spanish came up from Mexico and declared it as part of New Spain. After Mexico gained their independence in 1821, the Four Corners region was taken over by Mexico. It isn't common knowledge, but all of Utah and Colorado, and don't forget Arizona and New Mexico, belonged to Mexico. This lasted only 2 decades. The area was handed over to the United States in 1848 after the Mexican-American War. From that point on, the states kept changing shape. The first boundary was put in place in 1850, creating the New Mexico Territory and the Utah Territory. Four Corners was divided in half, with Utah on the top and New Mexico on the bottom. Then came the Civil War, in which the Confederacy tried to steal New Mexico. But when the war was over, the Union split the area into 4 individual states, and they've remained basically the same ever since. As for the monument's position, it's true that it's wrong. However, rest assured that when you visit the Four Corners Monument, you are indeed standing at the exact point where 4 states meet. The Supreme Court ruled that the location of the marker is the irrefutable boundary of all 4 states. It's just that it was put in the wrong spot to begin with. Thanks for watching! If you are new here, be sure to hit that subscribe button and come back soon! And if you have more time, be sure to stick around for an older video you might have missed.
The Cloud Warriors. In 2008, the ruins of a lost city were found by locals in Peru who were bushwhacking through the thick cloud forest in search of a waterfall. The surprised locals stumbled upon a settlement about 12 acres large in one of the most isolated parts of the Peruvian Amazon. The settlement was built at the edge of a mountainside, high above sea level, roughly 1,000 years ago. Researchers believe the mysterious settlement was likely inhabited by the even more mysterious Cloud People. In Peru, the legend of the Cloud People is well known. The Cloud People, or the Chachapoya, were a race of white-skinned humans in the 9th century. They lived in the dense mountain forests along the northern edge of the Andes in Peru. It was up above in the mountains that they prospered until around 1470, when they were conquered by the Inca. The Inca didn't completely wipe out the Chachapoya, but they definitely did some damage. The final nail in the coffin for the Cloud People was the arrival of the Spanish in 1535. Their whole race was wiped out by smallpox and disease. For this reason, all we know about the Chachapoya comes from legend and archaeology. They were said to be some of the fiercest warriors on the planet, with skin as white as snow and fair blonde hair. They didn't look anything like the Inca or any other group in South America, and it's still a mystery where they came from. Hopefully, this newly discovered city in the jungle will help archaeologists learn more about the enigmatic origins of the Pale Cloud Warriors. Scara Bray. Off the north coast of Great Britain is a place called Orkney. Orkney is an archipelago, a collection of over 70 small Scottish islands that have been inhabited since the Stone Age. It was in the winter of 1850 that Orkney was battered by a terrible and unprecedented storm. Extreme winds and high tides ripped the grass right off the ground. The storm happened to clear the surface sediment from a large mound, revealing the outline of stone buildings. The bitter weather had uncovered the remains of 4 ancient houses at the ends of the earth. Scara Bray, as the site became known, was a settlement at what must have felt to the Neolithic people like the edge of the universe. There is nothing for hundreds and thousands of miles beyond the shores of this remote island. Even after this storm revealed the city, nobody really cared, and the island remained undisturbed. It wasn't until 1925 that archaeologists began to take an interest in it. Excavations continued in 1930, and now, nearly a century later, we have a pretty good idea of who lived in this faraway place. The village was likely established around 500 BC, although the earliest people lived on the same plot of land as far back as 3200 BC. There are 8 dwellings in total, semi-subterranean houses like hobbit holes from Lord of the Rings. This is still one of the best preserved Neolithic sites on the planet. All of the original walls are still standing, and even the original stone slabs on the roofs. Experts believe Scara Bray was only abandoned when the locals had accumulated too much garbage. They decided it was just easier to build a new settlement than clean up all their trash. Prehistoric mountain dwelling. 40,000 years ago, Stone Age hunters settled inside of a mountain cave in what is now Ethiopia. Scientists only recently discovered this mysterious rock shelter, and they have announced it as the oldest known prehistoric dwelling in a high mountain range. This is according to the scientists who published their study in the journal Science. The rocky dwelling is located in southern Ethiopia in the Bale Mountains. The mountains are in such a remote place that they have never really been colonized, at least not in modern history. Nobody appears to have lived here since the last glacial period. That was when the world was still covered in giant blocks of ice. Scientists analyze everything from the environmental conditions to the soil, trying to figure out the history of the mountains. They were able to discover that the glaciers ended not far from where the hunters dwelled in their cave. 40,000 years ago, they would have lived at the edge of a wall of ice. They would have had no idea what was beyond it, if it was the end of the world, or if the glacier went on forever. Archaeologists also found evidence of primitive tools and the bones of giant mole rats. Putting all these pieces together, we can see how primitive hunters took to living in what was the only sustainable place around. One of the reasons may have been the abundance of giant mole rats. They could hunt the rodents all year in a place that wasn't exactly crawling with easy and available prey. This is incredible because it proves Stone Age hunters adapted to whatever environment they found themselves in. They realized ample food could be had by staying in this high mountain cave, and so that's what they did. El Tepos Teco. El Tepos Teco is an ancient pyramid temple standing at the top of a mountain in the middle of a foggy rainforest. It's about as wild as it gets, located deep in the dangerous mountain territory of Morelos in Mexico. The ancient structure can only be reached by driving about 2 hours from Mexico City and then hiking far into the spectacular world of a cloud forest. The temple was built by the Aztec, dedicated to the god Tepoztecatl. Tepoztecatl was the lord of drunkenness, baby making, and was also closely associated with the fermentation process of brewing alcohol. He was such a famous god, and his temple was such a sacred place, that pilgrims traveled from as far as Chiapas and even Guatemala, from the remnants of the old Maya kingdom, just to give praise to him. The temple was built around the year 1502, high above the surrounding village. It was made in the shape of a massive pyramid, but only had 2 rooms inside of it. There's the foyer, which opened to the grand temple staircase, and then the central room that was the inner sanctum. The central chamber contained a huge statue of Tepoztecatl when it was in service, but nobody has ever found the remains of the statue. These days, the inner sanctum is empty, and the temple is slowly crumbling to ruins. Big shout out to Jackie Said and Animosity. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, welcome, and be sure to subscribe for more videos like these. Chichester, or something like that, is an ancient village in the UK that was occupied 2,000 years ago during the Roman occupation. Experts say it's one of the best examples of a Roman-British settlement in Britain. The village contained small homesteads with stone walls and thatch roofs. They would have looked exactly like what you expect 2,000-year-old houses to look like. They were positioned along a main village street, and each house had its own courtyard. This may sound very nice, but the whole settlement was rudimentary, built of piled-up stones and not nearly as impressive as other cities in Britain. Still, what makes the village so fascinating is that it's set into a hillside and has unparalleled views of the country in all directions. Standing in the center of the village today, you can see all the way across rural England to the ocean. For the ancient people who lived and farmed here, it would have been a magical view. But by far the strangest thing about Chichester is its underground passage. Archaeologists discovered the remains of a mysterious tunnel winding underneath the settlement, and nobody can say what it was used for. It may have been a secret ritual compound, or it could have been used for storing food. What's your guess? Let me know in the comments below. Viking cave settlements. In the 9th century, Vikings from both Scandinavia and the British Isles began migrating to Iceland. It was a bizarre decision considering how rough life was there. Winters were harsh, there was hardly any food to eat, and they had to live through volcanic eruptions. It was a terrible time to be a settler in Iceland, but the Vikings persisted. One of the stranger things they did to survive was build extensive cave systems, and it's only now that these cave systems are being revealed. Archaeologists recently found man-made caves from the Viking era near the town of Oddi. Researchers from the Archaeological Institute of Iceland say the caves were dug out in the 10th century and used as extremely primitive dwellings. The Vikings went from having civilized settlements and cities in Scandinavia to living in dank pits in the ground. The town of Oddi did eventually grow and prosper, becoming a real hotspot for culture and education in the Middle Ages. But in the 10th century, the settlement was little more than a series of holes in the ground. The pyramids of the Amazon. Archaeologists just discovered the ruins of 11 ancient settlements in the Amazon jungle. These settlements were found by beaming lasers through the jungle canopy to scan an area of about 1,700 square miles in Bolivia. The lasers were mounted to a helicopter, and the helicopter flew over the area trying to pick up traces of a lost civilization. What's really interesting is that these settlements never would have been found without the technology used by the researchers. They can't be seen from above because the jungle is too thick. They can hardly even be seen on the ground because Mother Nature has reclaimed them. The only reason we even know the settlements are there is because the lasers peeked underneath the surface of the jungle, identifying marks left behind by the buildings. This came as a hugely unexpected discovery. Until now, no one ever really thought the Amazon was full of people. Everyone kind of assumed it was just a few small tribes living in huts. But the laser scans revealed huge settlements, advanced cities occupied between 500 and 1400 AD. They had ceremonial architecture, infrastructure for managing water, and things like canals and reservoirs. These were truly complex settlements like any that could be found in the world of the Maya or the Aztec. The only difference is that they were built deep in the Amazon jungle. Also, nobody's really sure why these settlements were abandoned or where the people went. Lost Idaho. Researchers may have just discovered evidence of one of the oldest settlements in North America. The settlement appears to date back 16,000 years, and it may have been founded by brave travelers from Northeast Asia. The remains of the settlement were found in Idaho, of all places, at the Cooper's Ferry Archaeological Site. The site is in the middle of nowhere, right beside the Salmon River. The place was first excavated in the 1960s, But it was more recently, in 2018, when experts from Oregon State University made the truly important discoveries. The team uncovered 2 large pits containing treasure from a bygone age. There were 189 artifacts found, things like scraps from stone tools and bone fragments. Carbon dating of charcoal in the pit proved it to be 16,000 years old. This means that human beings were already living in Idaho 3,000 years before the Clovis culture that spread through North and South America. Researchers believe the settlement was built by people from Northeast Asia who traveled along the Pacific coast in boats. As crazy of a theory as it is, that's what the experts are saying. They think the theory of the Bering Land Bridge, or people walking from Asia to North America when there was land connecting the 2 continents, isn't fully correct. These scientists believe people migrated over the sea, which would explain how they made it down the Salmon River. They may have been the first humans in Idaho, building a settlement in a truly untouched land. Canyon de Shelli. Canyon de Shelli in Arizona contains 5,000 years of Native American history. It's located inside the Navajo Nation, near the border of New Mexico. What's truly unique about Canyon de Shelli, though, is that hiding in the shadows of its tall red canyons and mounds of dusty red dirt are lost settlements. Ancient prehistoric tribes lived here seasonally, hunting and chasing herds across the plains. For 5,000 years they did this, arriving each year and etching petroglyphs on the canyon walls and stones. Then, around the year 200 BC, people finally decided to settle inside the canyon itself. These people are called basket makers by archaeologists and are considered the ancestors of the Puebloan peoples. It was the Puebloan peoples, such as the Hopi and the Zuni, who built their grand cliff dwellings in the southwest United States around 1,000 years ago. When the basket makers settled in the canyon, the landscape was quite different. There was yucca grass growing on the floor, which allowed the indigenous people to make baskets and sandals and other crafts. They were also able to farm around the canyon, growing everything from squash to beans. But it was their settlements that were truly unique and unusual. Just like the Anasazi cliff dwellings, the basket makers built their settlements right into the sides of cliffs. Lost Antarctic settlement. Experts claim that melting snow in Antarctica has revealed the remains of a mysterious settlement. One of these experts, archaeologist Ashoka Tripathi from the University of Calcutta, has based their findings on satellite images taken by NASA. The images show a rapidly melting continent, revealing the bland rock underneath snow and ice. But in some of these images, Ashoka believes the remains of a human settlement can be seen. These are not the physical remains of buildings. There are no ruins or crumbling structures. Instead, the melting snow has revealed patterns under nearly a mile of ice that resemble man-made structures. One of them, a square imprint in the ice at the very center of what looks to be a lost settlement, may have been a pyramid. This pyramid imprint is surrounded by other imprints of what seem to be houses and other buildings. Nobody knows what in the world is going on here. It seems there were structures at one point, but they are now long gone, either destroyed or naturally decayed. It looks like all that remains are the marks the buildings left in the ice. If Ashoka Tripathi is correct, it would mean there was a civilization living in Antarctica before it was frozen over. Thanks for watching! Which of these ancient settlements would you have loved to see in its prime? Let me know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe if you haven't already. See you soon! Bye!